Taneytown Planning Commission please come to order? Would you stand for the pledge of the flag, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
It's always good to see so many smiling faces at the beginning of the meeting. I'd like to welcome you guys here this evening. The commission members should have received the draft minutes of July 29th, 2019. Is there any corrections or additions to those minutes? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make that a motion that we accept the minutes from last July 29th.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, likewise. Carried. Thank you. Delegation and action items. Jim, would you like to start us out with the grassroots and Maryland capacity?
Well, first up, as you just said, is Grassroots, also known as Maryland Compassionate Care and Wellness. We have at last received all of the applicable agency approval letters. When the packets went out, I was going with a verbal from the Soil Conservation District, but that letter did arrive since the packets went out. That's one of the two that I put on the table for you this evening. So with that, we have all the applicable approvals in order, so I would recommend site plan approval.
Okay, and when you mentioned that letter, you're talking about the one from Clayton Black with those 9 or 8 items?
No, one of the two that I put on the table tonight was the Carroll Soil Conservation District. There was one from BPR and then one that's got the little county
Okay.
silhouette at the top. Yeah, that was the last one we were waiting on for Maryland Compassionate Care.
Okay, and it looked like our first thing is to entertain a motion for a preliminary amendment.
So move.
Is there a
I'll second.
Preliminary plan approval.
plan approval? Yes, sorry. And it was second. So any further discussion on that? Any comments from the floor? Okay, all those in favor of the motion for approval for a preliminary site plan, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, likewise. Carried. With that, correct me if I'm wrong, we can move right into final approval on that.
Yes, there's nothing that needs to change between the preliminary and final on this one, other than just when the Mylars are printed, we'll just make sure that they don't say preliminary.
Okay.
So that's it.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion for
I'll
that.
make a motion to move for final approval.
Okay, second. Any further discussion on that? Any comments from the floor? All those in favor of the motion for final approval, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise? Carried. Thank you. Okay. Did the gentlemen from Grassroots have any comments or anything to say? Oh, okay. I wasn't looking for that, but I saw it come between you guys. No, we're good. Okay. Okay, the next item on the agenda is the Tannery Barn revised site plan, development plan, request for approval. Jim, you want to start us out on that?
Sure. Just to kind of recap a little bit from last month, with the pavilion being enclosed now to be considered more of a building addition than a pavilion, the commission asked for some details about the exterior finish of the building, some elevation views, and also required that an engineered solution with regard to the runoff be developed. So Tannery Barn has engaged BPR, who did the drawing that was in your packet, the revised site plan that's also up on the board there. And as far as the stormwater runoff, the roof runoff to the rear is going to be sent underground to two 6-inch pipes to go to the rear of the property into the drainage and utility easement there. And there's going to be a curb along the radius of the driveway towards the downstream property that should redirect water to out to the street rather than letting it flow directly into the house down the hill. The other item that I put on the table for you this evening was a letter from BPR, and that is the engineer certifying that the runoff measures will be adequate to redirect the post-developed runoff from the site. So with that, as well as the elevation drawings that were in your packets, I think that all of the requirements the commission set forth last month have been satisfied. And to memorialize them, we did develop an addendum to the Public Works Agreement. And once that was signed, we did allow construction to continue because we had that commitment that the drawings would be provided and that a UNO, a use and occupancy, is not going to be issued until after you approve the revised site plan. So before you tonight is the revised site plan, and as I said, we believe it addresses all the concerns that were raised by the commission last month. And the developer and engineer are here if there are any questions about that.
Well, let's maybe get a motion on the floor here first.
I'll make a motion to approve the revised site plan.
I'll second it.
May I add, with the conditions of the recital that was submitted to PWA, I just feel funny about approving the site plan with these outstanding conditions. So if we approved the site plan with these conditions included in that motion, is that more?
That's fine, it links it together, and this is already executed.
Okay, okay. So would you amend that motion?
I can amend it
And Ollie,
to
would you
say that, yep.
amend your second?
I'll second it.
Okay, now we're open for discussion. Anyone on the board here have any comments, or anyone from the floor? Please come to.
Does this satisfy her?
I'm not concerned with that.
Oh, she was the one that made all the noise.
Steve Farley, 65 Frederick Street. So my question is the property over 5,000 square feet by the county standards, and has that been measured to determine if all the stormwater management precautions are taken for the amount of, whatever's required by the county or by the city? Or was that ever addressed? Because in the last conversation, we talked about the measurement of, was it 5,000, or was it over, or was it under? And I don't know if that was ever determined, Jim.
We've got that covered probably in two areas. Jim, if you want to hit that, if not, we'll go to the engineer.
The total square footage of disturbance has not been calculated at this point, but in the Public Works Agreement addendum, the developer is going to provide as-built drawings, and those will include the calculation of total disturbed area. Should that number prove to be over 5,000 square feet, then the tannery barn is going to have to go back and incorporate a water quality facility of some sort onto the site. So the idea basically is that they're going to address the runoff issue now before they get their use and occupancy. And then once construction is complete, they have 30 days to provide the as-built drawings. And then if they show that more than 5,000 square feet was disturbed, then there's an additional time period that a water quality feature will have to be constructed on the site. So the idea basically is that we're going to address the immediate problem of the runoff now, and if it turns out that it's over 5,000 square feet, they're going to play catch up and do something along the lines of a rain garden or a
I'm not
vegetative swale or
an
something like
expert,
that.
but doesn't that get done generally first before
It generally does.
you get to this stage?
It generally does, yes.
So, the other concern I had was the curb. I was told a curb was being put in, but I didn't hear any mention of a curb or a berm being put down the driveway. I was told that in Jim, by you, and
Yep.
by Victoria, and I didn't hear that this evening about any kind of berm or curb.
Yes, that is part of the plan. There's going to be 90 feet of 6-inch curb along your side of the driveway.
That's part of the information we received this evening also.
I'm sorry?
That's part of the information
Part of
we
it, okay.
received also.
So the only thing I ask is if everything's done properly, then I'm okay with everything, but if it's not done properly, then I would ask why, because again, why would we be doing, not measuring at the end of the project as opposed to the beginning of the project? Because as I stated last meeting, every project that starts has a stormwater management requirement prior to getting off the ground. And this project did not, and consequently, I suffered financial loss, and that's my problem, but I don't understand why that has happened, why it's allowed to happen, and I just hope it doesn't continue to happen, so, that this rectifies the issue. So that's, if you guys think it's the right thing, I'll go with you. I believe you got all the plans, you're the experts, so if you think it meets all the criteria, then I'm fine with that. So the only thing I ask of you is just make sure it's done properly.
And that is our intent.
Yeah, thank you.
And that's with our documents in front of us. I see there are ways of making sure that happens.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And were you the engineer, sir? Did you want to make any comments? If you do, please come to the mic about.
I guess the only comment I'll say is the plans that you got in front of you now, the only update or revision since I guess the approved plan came out is the 2 downspout collector pipes and that curb. I hope it's clear on there where those are going. And I say that is adequately to direct the water away from developed areas, or in the neighbor's case, his house. It's not stormwater, but it is a diversion away from downstream properties, from developed areas and downstream properties. So I guess, if everybody's good, I don't know what the next move is. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I just wanted to tell you, I got a call maybe a couple weeks ago, 2-3 weeks ago, and I guess her contractor, Victoria's contractor, and asked if we would take the job over, and I was supposed to do an SHA as-built, which I did, and then this came along. I don't know a lot about the job yet, but I'm learning what has to be done. So, but the immediate problem of diverting stormwater should be taken care of.
And we should know those square footages with 30
With the-
days after the UNO?
With the as-built, yes.
Okay. All right, any other comments? Jim, would you mind repeating the motion that was made with the additions?
I'm not sure if I got the revised part down. Judy moved to approve the revised site plan incorporating the Public Works Agreement addendum for a tannery barn.
That's the main issue, right? Right. Okay. All right. So all those in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, likewise. Carried. Thank you. Okay. Guess the next item on the list, Jim, will come down to your report. And give me a second. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Alrighty. We've already covered the majority of it, Tony. Did want to note that in your packets was the preliminary plan for the Taneytown Crossing site development plan. That one is the proposed rental community at basically the intersection of Harney Road and Westview Drive. So while we did not have adequate time to have the property posted, to have them on the agenda for this month, the review process can begin. So the review agencies are going to start looking at it. We're going to start looking at it, as will our engineer. So if any commission members have questions or comments, please feel free to give me a call or shoot me an email with those, and I can either, answer questions or incorporate any comments that you may have in the beginning of the review into my review comments, since I have not provided a review letter at this point. So hopefully we'll be able to keep that moving forward. I did hear from the developer today, just trying to touch base and get a feel for review times and things like that. So, so we are moving ahead on that one. The family daycare.
On that one there, we've already did the concept approval.
Correct. Yes.
Do we have to, do we really have to go with the appeals board on the amount of parking places in that place?
Their special exception to reduce the number of spaces, yes, that's the standard that we have to go with at this point. So,
Because when you steal parking places and give to, well, you don't want me to talk about it tonight, do you?
We can't really go into detail because it's not on the agenda and it's not
When
open
you
for the
steal
public.
parking places to give it to a dog run or whatever, or community building, and take it away from houses, that's wrong.
well, and going back to some of the testimony provided to the Board of Appeals, the developer believes that the project will actually be overparked based on their experience with similar communities. And with it being under one management company for all the units, should that begin to become an issue, they can certainly tailor who they rent to, and with it being a number of apartment dwellings in there that are not going to be, they may not be your usual 2 parents and 2.3 kids or whatever. They can tailor who they rent to. Also, that they may have more single parents who may not utilize 2 parking spaces. I suspect
Would you
that's
like
the
to try that?
expectation.
I've been a landlord too many years to do that. You just don't do that.
Well, they, as I said, they believe that it's overparked based on their experience. So, and we are bound to uphold the Board of Appeals number on that.
Well, I was against it to start with.
Jay, go ahead.
I mean, without getting too detailed, we'll just think of it a different way. You can't turn the plan down based on the number of parking spaces as long as it complies with the Board of Zoning Appeals. Okay?
So we have to go
But-
along with them, that's
well-
my answer.
But you can work something else out possibly with that. And I'm not saying that, I'm just making stuff up.
Right.
Let's say that you all decide that the dog thing isn't important, or it could be smaller, or it could something else. And they say, hey, look, don't build this, but can you add some parking here? You can't turn them down if they meet the minimum, but you can work things out to have others, if that makes any sense.
Maybe they'll want something and we can compromise.
Right. That's the difference.
Anything else? Go ahead, Jay.
All right. The only other thing I wanted to share is that the family daycare cases that were before the Board of Appeals, we had one on Hunting Horse Street that was in Newland last month, and then we had the continuance of one on Carroll Heights. Both of those were, the special exceptions were granted in both cases there, so we'll have 2 more family daycares up and running soon.
Was anything mentioned about the swimming pool?
Yes. Yes,
I'm
there's.
sorry, I couldn't make the meeting, so how was that addressed?
Um,
And if it's
Waiting-
too much in
It's a
detail,
wading pool, it's not a swimming pool. He corrected that.
They have a removable ladder now,
okay,
and the state law is gonna change, or the regulations are gonna change, saying They have to have a removable ladder or something else as a requirement.
Okay,
So when that happens, it'll happen anyway.
okay.
Chance that they may be required to provide additional fencing or some additional barrier in the future as the daycare regulations change.
To your comment, Ollie, a foot of water to a 2-year-old is still,
Huh?
a foot of water to a 2-year-old is still an issue.
I
to
know
me.
what it is.
Okay.
I know what it is, but
All right, continue on, Jim, please.
That's really about all that I wanted to catch you guys up on for this month.
Okay. So, moving on down the list. There isn't any other comments? Creekside, how's it?
Creekside's still working on an easement issue with one property owner out there. I really have not been able to spend time on it. I've had a conversation with the homeowner, but I haven't managed to go back through the documents that they were questioning. They had some concerns that the easement they're being asked to provide was larger than what they understood it was supposed to be. And I just have not managed to catch up with them and talk through the issue. But I think that's the last link to get things closed out and get all the deeds turned over to us.
And my other question was, Meads Crossing, when do you think they're gonna come in for the next phase? The reason I bring that up is because the issues that they brought before us, that committee, I'd like to be able to review some of those if,
As far as the surrounding community,
yes,
the concerns there, yes. And I expect that when we do have Meads back on the agenda, we'll probably have a pretty full house that night. But I don't have a tentative date from Steve Smith, Red Gold, at this point. I know they are doing some behind-the-scenes work on Phase 2 at this point, because we have heard from Steve Smith and we've discussed the idea of amending their DARA with regard to water recharge areas, because we have determined when we reset our water allocation over, well, I'm not sure if it's been 2 years now or not, but it's been quite some time. We determined that we have adequate water and sewer capacity with the wells that we have already, and of course the existing treatment plant, to handle the rest of the Meads Crossing subdivision, the future phases, as well as what's in the pipeline for the remaining phase of Meadowbrook and Copperfield. So without having to go to MDE to increase our allocation for, it was likely going to be well 17, the well by the Baptist Church. Since we don't have to go and ask to be able to pump more water, we're not going to be asked to provide recharge. So we don't have to ask Meads Crossing to provide recharge. Jay can certainly weigh in on this. I don't know that a DARA amendment is really necessary because the language talks about as required by MDE. So if MDE doesn't require it, they won't be required to do it. But I think an amendment would certainly clarify things a little bit, and I think that's what Meads is looking for. So, I know they're trying to get that ironed out so they can continue on with discussions with regard to financing and getting everything lined up for the next phase of the project. So,
okay.
so we'll probably know a little bit more on that in the next couple months. I think we're targeting November to present the DARA amendment to the mayor and council. As far as other active site plans, both Meads and Meadowbrook are continuing to pull building permits at a pretty healthy rate.
You said 5 new homes.
So that's really about it, unless folks have any questions about a specific project.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, Jay?
Jim sold some of the thunder that we were talking about the DARAs, but let me give you an idea. It's gonna have a cascading effect because there's similar sorts of language in Meadowbrooks and in Copperfields. So as soon as they see that one has done it, they're all gonna wanna do it. As Jim said, it's gonna take the guesswork out for them. They don't like that hanging over. Their finance people don't like that stuff hanging over. So if you recall, just so we're all up to speed, what this means is the developer's rights and responsibilities agreement will be amended, a couple language, a couple lines. It'll be introduced by the council since it's an agreement with the city. And then it comes to you all. And although we always look at it and talk about it, and that's great, your decision point is this consistent with the comprehensive plan? And these technical things are always consistent with it. So usually like it's consistent when we talk about the bigger issue. So it'll come to you for that. You'll have to make a determination and then it'll go back to them for approval. So a byproduct of this and something I've suggested to the council, and it's just, we just don't have time to get to it with everything that's moving here in the city, is maybe an update or a primer on the water situation. In the fact that we all knew it like the back of our hand 10 years ago, and those were the rules we operated under. And those rules still apply, except all the factors that make up that are different. So like the water usage of the town is different, the amount of availability is different. And we examined it last year, and that's where we came to the conclusion of, yeah, we don't need these things. But I thought it might be important that the council, maybe the planning commission, get like a presentation, maybe from CDM, something like that, saying, here's how we calculated it. This is why we have water for all the development that you've heard of. And if it's a development you haven't heard of, then it's a different set of rules. And maybe we start thinking about what those rules are. And the reason I bring all that up is, like the Sewell development, the Sewell annexation, the whole Sewell thing, that may or may not, no decision made, but may or may not apply, the old rules may not apply to that because they weren't factored into the water calculation. They weren't factored into the impact fees. Maybe we need to redo how we think of things for the next person through the door. If that makes sense. Because we planned for everybody that you see here and Mountain Brook. And the question would be, well, what about the next guy? And that's what we probably should be starting to think about before the next guy is actually at the table. So I'm going to talk to the mayor and council about that and see how we can present it. It really isn't something that you can just hand to you because it won't mean much. It really needs to be kind of explained and walked through the methodology. So
Jay, when you talk about the next guys, is Taneytown Crossing one of those next guys, or are they factored in to the numbers as they are?
I think they're factored into the numbers as they are. So, these would be non-infill lots, so it would be things that were outside of town, or large lots like the Huffman property is not calculated in because we don't have anything for that. But it really is a mathematical thing, and it's important to understand it because decisions you guys are going to make going forward in the council depend on that, and Sewell's is the example. You may have to deal with them differently, and you can't use, we've all been here for a while, the same criteria of saying, oh, we want a well, and we want impact fees at $5,000 a tap. That's old. Now we have to figure out what else is new, and kind of almost start all over. Taking it back to like the early 2000s, that's when we kind of came up with this. So it's easy, it just needs to be done. So that's all related to the DARA, and I think that when you do the DARA, it's going to have to follow through so that it's all out on the table. And that's all I have. That's on the thing. Unless you have questions for me.
You meant, go ahead, Ollie.
Didn't Sewell's offer us a well that they drilled out there, a big well though? A good well, I mean.
They did in the past. They offered it. I mean, when they came before, and I'm sure
Couple
that
years ago.
it's the no-brainer that we're going to say, of course we want it. I mean, because we always want that. But the question will have to be grappled with, we want the hole in the ground, but do we want to actually put a pump station and pump the water out of it when we can get the same amount of water out of one that already spent $1 million to put a pump on? And then that starts calculating in the recharge calculations and the cost, and driving the capital cost. There's, hey, that would be nice, But were you willing to pay $1 million to make it nice? So that's one of the things that has to be determined.
Maybe 20 years down the line, you want to do that.
Right, and that's why we'd always say if there's a well and it's a good producer, we want it, but we may not want it now. Because a lot of people think, well, we're building houses, the well needs to be there. The well can be anywhere along the system, so.
You mentioned Mountain Brook. 20 years ago, when we talked when Mountain Brook was hot, wasn't there some criteria set up as far as if something didn't happen in so many years with the bypass and all that stuff, wasn't there some dates and time, or was that before your time?
No, there was,
I believe their agreement with regard to that right-of-way has expired.
Okay.
So
But we're in no obligation whatsoever other than it's on our,
the city has chosen to maintain that alignment or multiple alignments on our comprehensive plan. So when Mountain Brook Farms is ready to come back to the table, those are, one of those alignments is something that we'll be looking for to be in their concept plan.
okay,
Because we chose to maintain that even though.
on our
the
comprehensive,
right-of-way
yeah,
agreement
okay.
has expired.
and I think, and again, we're going to the way back here, that we gave community village designation out there
Yes.
with no expiration date. I think that's the one we learned on. Where we said, it was like, the next one we should have an expiration date. And then we started doing that. Unfortunately, that's the one that didn't do anything, and the other ones that had a date did. So when we eventually come back to it, we might need to revisit, what does that mean?
We made quite a few changes, on that whole plan.
Right. I mean, it wouldn't be that plan, but they would
It'd
still
be
have
something.
community village designation. And so you'd have to look at, well, what does that mean? Because it seems that everything that comes through is community village now, which is like the free-for-all zone.
All right,
Just a quick follow-up on the water capacity. We have 37,085 gallons per day of available capacity beyond what has been granted final approval or preliminary plan approval. So if you take our capacity and then subtract out everything that's that somebody could come in and pull a building permit for tomorrow. That's all the things that have final approval. Those projects are 42,500 gallons, and then that leaves us 92,835 gallons per day. And then we've got 55,750 gallons per day of projects with preliminary plan approval. So Taneytown Crossing hasn't gotten onto that part of the list yet, but they're relatively small. They're not, we're not talking about another Meadowbrook or Meads Crossing with them. It's only, now I'm drawing a blank on it, but
36.
it'd be
32
60-some
dwellings.
thousand.
So we're not, we have
6,000.
capacity for them, but we are getting to the point where we need to have that conversation, especially as we discuss the Sewell annexation, and, they certainly will bring recharge acreage into the city with them, but that may not be enough acreage to cover their demand. So those are things we'll be talking about when we develop an annexation agreement with them, and things move forward there.
Claire?
Good evening. I have a couple updates. I just wanted to remind you that we are hosting a public hearing for the accepted bike ped plan. That's going to be held during planning commission, our regularly scheduled day planning commission, so September 17th at 9 a.m. As for the Concord zoning, we have one work session left with the Board of County Commissioners, and that's scheduled for
Excuse me, what was the name?
Cody.
Cody.
Yes, he's going to be your new liaison, so he'll be doing your planning commissions from now on.
Like she mentioned, my name is Cody Spade. Just a little bit about myself. I grew up in Carroll County in the Sykesville area. Went off to the University of Kansas for a bachelor's in architecture and a master's degree in urban planning. And recently just acquired the position of comprehensive planner of county. So I'm really excited to take over for Claire and get to know you guys and work alongside you guys for the upcoming months. So thanks.
Just to give you a heads up, this end of the county is a little bit different from the lower end.
Trust me, I realize.
You'll see some friendly faces up here.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Thank you. Welcome aboard. Anybody have any other business? George?
When does traffic become a subject for the future in Taneytown? And not just street traffic, but a bypass? I'm thinking 20 years down the road with the two areas that's growing right now, and they're going to be more eventually.
Go ahead, Jim.
That is something that we've discussed with Mayor Wance, as far as the perhaps launching something of a campaign to get Antrim Boulevard back on the long-range Baltimore Metropolitan Regional Transportation Plan. You know, we certainly don't expect to see that road be built or engineered in the next 5 or 10 years, but we thought that perhaps some lobbying effort to get that back on the Baltimore Metropolitan Regional Plan would be something that we could shoot for during the mayor's administration. So it's been discussed, and you know, I think we just need to start pushing and having all the conversations we can with our elected representatives, and just, you know, basically keep lobbying and campaigning for it.
Make sure we get Commissioner Wance on board too.
I'm thinking of traffic all the way around the town, a roundabout, with Balliner and Sewell and Mountain Gate some of these days. There's going to be more of them, and those things don't happen overnight. It takes 10, 15, 20 years before things happen, and we're at that point now. We need to do some planning.
Okay. All right. Barry? Judy? Ollie? Jim? Okay, well, it looks like our next meeting is September the 30th. So with nothing else in front of us, I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Thank you.